vampires. Hi, Alexi here. Welcome back to my channel in which I think about vampires. Okay, that's sort of a lie. Usually what I do is I talk about fandom happenings, but you know, always in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about the next piece of vampire media I am going to consume, and usually it is somehow related to Anne Rice's Interview with the Vampire. Anne Rice wrote a book, Interview with the Vampire, that's crazy, in the 70s. They made a movie out of it in the 90s, and then AMC picked it up and made it into a show in 2022. There are currently 2 seasons out. The third, which is going to be The Vampire Lestat, is coming out June 7th. Here Comes the Gaze, Here Comes the Fear. So I thought, what if I recapped the vampire show? Quick disclaimers before I start. I am not going to be doing a super deep, analysis of any of the episodes of the show, but I am going to have some commentary. If you want a really good analysis as opposed to summary video, you probably want this one by Princess Weeks. Literally, if I'm not recommending a Princess Weeks video, there's definitely something wrong with me, like a vampire probably ate me. Also, this video is gonna contain spoilers. And finally, if you for some reason are Julie Soto, click off this video. This video is not for you. This channel is not for you. Everyone is welcome here but Julie Soto. Okay, let's get into it. Season 1, Episode 1. In the throes of increasing wonder. We open to an advertisement for the first online course taught by 2-time Pulitzer Prize winning journalist Daniel Malloy, played by Eric Bogosian, who also I think has won hella awards for his work with writing and just stage performance. So that was kind of a fun through line. Good for you, Eric Bogosian. But anyways, he says some stuff about sources being important or something. Hard cut to Daniel Malloy, who's watching the commercial on his TV. He kind of clicks to another channel. It's talking about the war in Russia. We see him then work on a puzzle. His hands are pretty shaky. He calls his doctor. He's like, hey, yeah, should I come in? I know we have an appointment scheduled, but I don't want to get super close to the bug if I don't have to. Is this new variant more contagious? So we are, taking COVID head on. A lot of shows set in this sort of time period and made in that sort of time period really struggled with what to do with COVID, and I think Interview with the Vampire incorporates it in really well. But yeah, it's all painfully normal. Daniel is having a conversation that I think a lot of Americans were having in 2022 about COVID. Anyways, he goes to get his mail, and in his apartment's mailbox, there's a box. And in the box, there's tapes. Daniel rummages around. He manages to find a boombox or something, and he puts the tapes in. And a voice, presumably his voice from the past, says, first question, you weren't always a vampire, were you? And he picks up the letter that comes with it. The letter is from the subject of the tapes, Mr. Louis Dupont du Lac. I really struggled to say that, guys. It's the French. Who's hoping that they can, quote, revisit the project boyish youth prevented us from finishing 49 years ago and thousands of miles removed from the room we shared in San Francisco. He wants to redo the interview. So Daniel flies to Dubai to interview a vampire. Daniel Malloy hops off the plane at DXB with a dream in his cardigan, except his dream is to rekindle an old interview flame with the most dangerous man in the world, and his cardigan, he is actually wearing a pretty comfortable looking cardigan. I'm kind of jealous, man. That looks comfy. We, the audience, are officially meeting Louis, played by Jacob Anderson. I chose modern Louis because his sweatshirt looks so comfy. Honestly, in Dubai, the house, scary looking, but everybody in there, the clothing looks so comfortable. Jacob Anderson is black. And in Anne Rice's book, Louis is a white plantation owner in a more rural Louisiana. This Louis story begins in 1910 in New Orleans, but I'm getting ahead of myself, okay? Louis is you've had some health concerns as of late to Daniel, and Daniel, God bless him, he's never not an unabrasive man, and he's yeah, well, the whole planet has COVID. Louis responds, you have Parkinson's. So this explains the shaking, the calling about the doctor's appointments, etc. Daniel pauses, then jumps right into well, yeah, you have got your own hangar at the airport and you've got a penthouse, and I know the Emiratis are really big on privacy, but this has got to be costing you a lot of money. Daniel's a little avoidant. We might be picking up on that. Then he's also like, also, that's the sun out there, and you're a vampire, so where's your coffin? And Louis, who now we know is really dramatic, and that will continue to be demonstrated, as like, you're standing in it. And then he like gestures to a guy who's over in the corner on his iPad, and my iPad guy pushes a little button, and the like film on the windows kind of comes up so it's not orange tinted anymore, and there's like a sliver of sunlight. And he like sticks his arm in it and it starts to disintegrate into ash. Then Daniel is like, well, forgive me if I'm a little nervous. This did not end great for me the last time. And he pulls out the collar of his shirt and shows off a bite scar. Then he turns on the tape player and we hear Louis yelling, "This, after all I've told you, is what you asked for, boy?" Tape Daniel responds, "Yeah, well, you don't know what human life is like. I mean, you've forgotten, man. I mean, you don't even understand the meaning of your own story." A cute sound of Louis attacking Daniel. Louis is like, "You were disrespectful." And Daniel is like, "Bro, I was high." Daniel also says, just like hire a transcriber, you have the tapes. And Louis is like, "And yet you got on a really long plane flight in the middle of a pandemic with an autoimmune disease. Clearly there's something you want to do here." Daniel admits that he did agree because he was confused that he didn't remember a lot of the tapes. He asks all the wrong questions, there's a lot of contradictions, etc. Louis says he wants to try again because both he and the world have changed, and he also finds the tapes very lacking. So Daniel starts setting up his laptop and his little mic. He starts by asking Louis, "How long have you been dead?" So I did choose modern Louis for this picture here, but I feel like since a lot of this show is flashbacks, I want to also, put up 1910s New Orleans Louis for a little bit. All right, we're ready. I don't know if you knew this, but Louis' story starts in 1910 New Orleans. He inherited a fair amount of wealth and also like social standing from his father's family, who ran a successful sugar business, although they gained a lot of their capital off of, quote, the backs of men that looked like my great grandfather. His father also had like run this sugar business into the ground. Like they were going bankrupt, man, by the time the father died. So Louis took like what was left of the money and invested it into businesses in Storyville, which is the old red light district, because that was the only place, quote, a man of his complexion could do, quote, righteous business. Daniel asks, like, "So what actually would you say your job was, Louis?" And Louis is like, "Well, you could say I operated a diversified portfolio of enterprises." And Daniel is like, "You were a pimp." And Louis is like, "The product was desire." Louis has to resolve an issue, okay? He does those rounds every night and resolves issues. That's part of his job. This girly Bricks, who's one of the girls that works at one of his, they call them sporting houses, it's brothels, had beat up her client Alderman Fenwick because he tried to switch to butt stuff when that was not what he had asked for nor paid for. And you can't do that, guys. You can't do that. So he deserved that shit, okay? Louis offers Mr. Fenwick, who's, God, he's over here. He's way over here. We hate him. A handkerchief, and Fenwick is like, "Don't touch me, N-word." And Louis is like, are you gonna make me regret calling a discreet doctor for you?" And Fenwick was like, "Oh, sorry, I didn't know it was you, Louis. Ha ha ha." And Louis has to be like, "Oh, no worries." So even though Fenwick is drunk, disrespected one of Louise's employees in Louise's place of business, who, by the way, that girl is black, by the way. And right afterwards, he's like, "Oh, she's so beautiful," again, like, and is waiting for a doctor on Louise's payroll. Louis still has to act deferential. There's definitely like an at the end of his sirs. Then Louis has to go deal with his brother. Where is Paul? Paul, who is like out preaching to some of the girls. Unfortunately, Paul has some mental health struggles, So he's trying to tell these girls to like go back to Jesus, and he's like, the birds told me to do it. Louis then has to pull a knife out of his cane and hold it to his brother's throat, and is like, if you don't go home, I will gut you. Because you can't look weak on Liberty Street. Daniel says that Paul sounds like a pain in the ass, and Louis says that overall he was actually really close to his brother and he really loved talking to him. They have a daily ritual of walking Paul to confession because confession calms him down a bit. The priest then, like, you know, sees Louis and is like, so I haven't seen you in confession for a bit. And Louis is like, haha, yeah. Louis is telling himself that he's not gay. He does this by going to see a sex worker at the Fair Play, Miss Lily. Now, the Fair Play serves a almost entirely white clientele, but because Louis is wealthy and has some family status, he has certain, like, privileges, I guess. But it's owned by this guy, Tom Anderson, who's also all the way down here because we hate him. Tom Anderson invites him to come play cards with the boys on Friday, whatever. Louis goes to meet Miss Lily on a terrace, but she's actually with some blonde French guy, Lestat de Liancourt, played by Sam Reed, who's actually Australian in real life, and Jacob Anderson is British. These people do pretty good accents, actually. And Lestat is like, how did you get through the door? To Louis, and Louis immediately gets defensive and is like, excuse me, like, why would you say that to me? Because that sounds kind of racist, Lestat. And Lestat is like, no, actually what I meant is that people here are racist, so you must be pretty resourceful to have gotten in here. Miss Lily then asks why Lestat hopped up the boat at New Orleans with a dream and an overcoat or whatever, and Lestat starts beaming his voice into Louis's head without moving his lips and talks about all the hot women, but it's like, but then I saw a guy pull a knife on his own brother on Liberty Street, and I was like, Lestat, we're home. So yeah, Lestat saw Louis threaten to stab his brother and thought it was hot, I guess. He's feeling Miss Lily up the entire goddamn time that he's saying this, though, which really pisses Louis off. Then the madame comes over and is like, oh, like, the room is ready for you, Miss Lily. So Lestat and Louis start putting bills and stuff on the table. It does feel like they are bidding for this woman. Yeah. Lestat wins by putting down like a ring or something. Louis leaves really mad. He had, you know, gone there only thinking of Lily, but he left thinking only of Lestat. And he tells Daniel, I didn't know if I wanted to murder the man or be the man. Spoiler alert, it is the secret third thing of wanting to have a gothic romance with him that spans truly almost centuries and become a vampire. It's card game time. Anderson is saying that a fever is affecting poor people at the wharf. It's causing them to be completely drained of their blood when they turn up dead. Wonder who could be causing that? Surely not the blonde French guy at the table. That's right, boys. Lestat is here and he's charming the pants off of everyone. Lestat has a really shitty hand, but he still asks for more money chips. So he's playing the part of kind of like an airhead rich boy. Anderson then says that Fenwick had just bought a sporting house, which again, brothel, and he recommended Louis run it. Fenwick asks Louis what he thinks of the location, and Louis gives him some like really free business advice, to be honest, like, oh, make sure to keep the drink margins pretty good so that you make money, you know, blah 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 blah. And Anderson is like, I said you'd run it for 10%, and Louis is like, respectfully, that's 10% for all of the work. And then fucking Anderson is like, well, there's capital investment, and he points at Fenwick, and then there's labor, and he points at Louis. And considering how many goddamn plantations there were in Louisiana, that feels pretty fucking racially charged, Anderson. But then he mind beams to Louis, these men look down upon you. I find it appalling how men like you are treated in your country. Lestat then fucking freezes time and is like, do you not know your value? Do you suffer these indignities for some larger purpose? The whole time Louis has a look on his face like what is happening, kind of like, look, right? Lestat is then like, I think there's opportunity in New Orleans, but I'm going to need protection from the wolves to seize it. So this is sort of in the vein of what initially draws Lestat to Louis in the books, in my opinion. Because see, one thing about Anne Rice is she will not write her vampires to have generational wealth. So like an interview with the vampire, Lestat is making all of his money from stealing from his victims, and he wants somebody to invest it. He's looking for a guy in finance, 6'5" finance, blue eyes finance, and to him that is Louis, because Louis runs a successful plantation, I guess. So yeah, part of why he turns Louis is because he wants a financial advisor. But in the show, Lestat is already wealthy. He wants somebody to teach him how to live in early 1900s America, New Orleans specifically. And also, like, he finds Louis fascinating. This scene is very much him flirting with Louis. So Lestat and Louis start hanging out, as Daniel so aptly puts it. They get him a new wardrobe, he gets some fancy books for his new house, whatever. Louis is confiding in another man that's not Paul for the first time ever, but he's being hunted and he doesn't even know it. Although actually a showrunner did say that Lestat sees all this as courting, which like the problem is, yeah, that would work on me. Grace, who is Louis' sister and is engaged to Levy, tells Louis to bring Lestat to dinner because she wants to meet this French white. At dinner that night, Lestat mentions that he took Louis to the opera, and Louis is like, yeah, I didn't really like it, I didn't really get it, I got hungry half of the way through, so we left. Then Paul is like, and what is the nature of your relationship with my brother, Mr. Leoncourt? And everybody kind of freezes up and gets real quiet because they're all trying to ignore the fact that these two are kind of fucking gay. Then Paul is like, the birds made me ask that. Lestat then tries to ask Levy how he came to propose to Grace. Paul interrupts again and asks if Lestat is religious. And Lestat then goes, oh, I actually did study to be a priest in a monastery, but my dad and my brothers found me and they dragged me away and they beat the shit out of me and God didn't intercede, so now I don't believe in organized religion, actually. And as he's saying this, there's sort of like a sound playing, so it kind of seems like he's using his little powers on Paul, which pisses Louis off, and he's like, you do not do that here. You need to stop. You do not do that with my family. Louis then walks Lestat home, and Lestat asks Louis why he lied about leaving the opera early, because he was basically in tears when the curtain fell. He was really moved by the art. What Lestat is pointing out is that Louis is trying really hard to keep up his facade of being strong in front of everyone, and it's really fucking tiring. He invites an already tipsy Louis up for a nightcap and convinces him by being like, oh, look, Miss Lily is here. Miss Lily, woohoo. So Louis and Miss Lily start making out, and then Lestat starts making out with her, and then Lestat hypnotizes Miss Lily, I guess, to make her pass out, and then he and Louis have floating vampire sex while Lestat drinks from him. And I'm not saying that Challengers 2024 was inspired by AMC's Interview with the Vampire 2022, but like Louis is like, yeah, so he did this thing called the little sip, which is very hard for vampires to do, apparently, I don't know. He then tells Daniel that he did not consider himself a homosexual man at the time. That is how he pronounces homosexual, but he's comfortable with his sexuality now. You know that. We met at a gay bar, Daniel, and Daniel was like, it was a good place to score. And Louis is like, so you've been married then? And Daniel is like, twice. Yeah, you know what, Daniel, you've also been divorced twice, so maybe you need to figure some shit out right there, okay? Anyways, Louis is like, yeah, being drunk from was basically like the best high you, Daniel, have ever had, multiplied by, quote, miles to the rings of Saturn and back. Louis does freak the fuck out and decides to never speak with Lestat again. Too emotionally close to him. Grace's wedding is very pretty. Louis and Paul like shuffle slash tap dance, I guess, and they do a very good job, in my opinion. Very talented young men. As the sun rises, they sit on the roof of their house. Louis tells Daniel that this was the last sunrise he ever saw, which is perhaps one of the main gifts being a vampire has afforded him. One thing about me, I love the trope of the last sunrise in vampire media. Sinners, I think, probably captures a little bit better, but this show does too, of like this being the last time that you get to do this very human action of like watching a day begin and like it just is a very visceral reminder of like what is sacrificed when you become a vampire, I guess. I don't know. I just really like the sun, so maybe I'm biased. But yeah, Paul then does jump off the roof and dies, I fear, so. Bye, Paul. Louis's mom does unfortunately blame Louis for Paul's death. She thinks that he said something to Paul to make him jump, and that Paul, who devoted his whole life to being like religiously pure as possible, is now in hell because of Louis. Fucking Lestat shows up to Paul's funeral procession because Louis is like easy prey at this point, I guess, and it's like, Louis, I think of you every night. Louis, please come back to me. Louis is like, bro, I'm at my brother's funeral, go away. So he is like disoriented at this point. He offers to walk his mom home. His mom refuses and tells Levy to do it instead. Then he, at this point kind of drinking and it's starting to rain, and he decides to go to the Fair Play and asks to see Miss Lily, only to find out that Miss Lily has been dead for several weeks and that she succumbed to the fevers that have been going around, aka Lestat fucking ate her. Finally, as a last resort, he goes to a church. It's storming at this point, and he confesses everything to the priest that Paul used to see every morning.
I'm a drunk, Lord. I'm a liar. I'm a thief, Lord. I profit off the miseries of other men, and I do it easy. Drugs, liquor, women. I lure them in and grab what they got, Lord. I take daughters with no homes, and I put them out on the street, Lord. And I lie to myself saying I'm giving them roof and food and dollar bills in their pocket, but I look in the mirror, I know what I am. The big man in the big house, stuffing cotton in my ears so I can't hear the cry. And Lord, I drag my family into this mess with me. And rather than fix it like a man should, Lord, I run like a coward. I lay down with a man. I lay down with the devil. And he has roots in me. All his spindly roots in me.
As Louis begs the priest for help, he admits that he wants to die, and the confession box shudders. Louis comes out to find the church on fire and Lestat eating the priest. Louis tries to stab him with his cane knife thingy. I really want one of those. And Lestat is like, this man is unworthy of you. How could you humiliate yourself like this? And Lestat then says that he can take away all of Louis's pain and shame and anger and swap it for power. He tells Louis, I love you. You are loved. Again, this would just work for me. This would just work for me, I fear. So Louis, for the first time in his life, feels seen and agrees. And Lestat turns him into a vampire in that burning church. Well, actually, they make out first. And then I think they eat another priest. Whatever, end of episode 1. Episode 2. After the phantoms of your former self. iPad guy, whose name is Rashid, is like to Daniel, okay, so go eat your dinner. Bestie Louis will join you for course 7 at the beginning of this episode. We get a montage of Daniel eating some very fancy food, but at the same time there's staff putting saran wrap down at the other end of the table, and then they bring out a bag of blood and a little dish with a little bowl for Louis to eat with a little spoon. Also, all the staff are wearing masks. Again, COVID, let's keep Daniel safe. I agree with that. Shout out that old man. Louis comes in and they pick up where they left off. So Louis, I fear he is not feeling great. He is physically dying. That's how turning into a vampire works, I guess. But also Lestat is making him help dispose of the dead priests by putting them in a crypt. Louis tries to like lick some of the dead priest's blood off the ground, and Lestat is like, bro, do not do that, it will kill you. Then Louis starts acting like a dude who's just dropped acid for the first time and is going to be insufferable about it for truly years to come. There's a scene where he sees the statue of an angel kind of like blurring and sharpen, which I think is a reference to this scene in the 1994 movie, which is truly one of the best scenes. Did not like Tom Cruise in that, because we haven't really gotten to see Louis just like happy, and I think the pure joy on his face is like, oh, this is so nice. Take a nice look at it, because you're never going to see it again. Lestat starts to teach Louis to hunt. They're at a bar. There's a bunch of soldiers singing and drinking, because we're like kind of building up to World War I right now. Louis immediately goes for the one in the middle of it all, but Lestat is like, he'll be missed. Go for people on the edges of society. Let your prey come to you in the beginning. Anyways, they bring a tractor salesman back to the house. Louis eats him. There is like a really funny moment where Lestat is like, bite the neck, Louis. Don't bite the blood, bite the neck. Whatever. Once the guy's dead, Louis starts to freak the fuck out. And he's like, I have to go home. I have to go on runs. I have to go check out on Grace and Paul. Paul's dead, Louis. He then runs out the door and Lestat mutters to himself, I think you'll find that quite difficult. Unfortunately, Lestat is right. I do hate to see a blonde man winning, and it is sunny out, which, causes Louis to start pulling a Spider-Man at the end of Infinity War and disintegrating. He does manage to run back to their house, and Lestat is like, the sun gives life to everyone but us. I should have told you that. And like, yeah, man, maybe you should have led with that. But then he's like, okay, time to sleep in the coffin, haha. And Louis, who is hella fucking burned at this point, is like, I'm not sleeping in the fucking coffin. And Lestat is then completely naked by this point, and it's like, you can be on top. Which, by the way, we see in other scenes, Lestat does sleep with pajamas. He's just being fucking annoying. Cut back to Dubai, and Louis says to Daniel, he rushed me headlong into it too fast. Death, rebirth, coming out, homicide, all in one night. And Daniel is like, the fuck you mean coming out? And Louis is like, well, sleeping in a coffin with a guy is kind of gay. But in the quiet dark, we were equals. Daniel then pointedly says into the microphone, white master, black student, but equals in the quiet dark. And Louis is like, is provocation the main strat people learn in your online course? Back in New Orleans, we see Louis and Lestat making the rounds in Storyville in their gay little car. We find out that Louis is having nightmares about killing. The guy managing security at one of Louise's brothels wants to manage one of Louise's new brothels. I think the one he's like co-running with Fenwick, Mr. 85% of profits. Lestat is like, oh yeah, that guy actually wants to steal from you and by overcharging for drinks. And Louis is like, well, how the fuck do you know that? And Lestat is like, oh yeah, vampires can read minds. I just read his mind. And Louis, in like a very light tone, is like, you were gonna sit on that for how long? And you know, Louis is just really like hyped to learn everything there is to learn about being a vampire. But the thing is, there's some red flags here. Lestat is withholding information until it is convenient for him. And sometimes it's fun information like reading minds, but sometimes it's not fun information like, oh, hey, this sun will fucking kill you. Lestat tells him that human thoughts boil down to, I want food, I want sex, and I want to go home. And Twilight wishes it were Interview with the Vampire because I want to go home goes crazy.
Money, sex, money.
I felt so seen. It wasn't the queer representation in this show. It wasn't the beautiful nuanced relationships. It was, I want to go home as one of the main human desires. So Louis asks Lestat what he's thinking, and Lestat is like, I actually don't know. Fledglings and makers can't read each other's minds anymore. The architects of our minds meant to humble us. We are at the mercy of each other's discretions or something. I don't, whatever. They go to a party that Louise's mom is throwing, and she's pretty cold to him and Lestat because she still blames Louis for his brother's death and his brother like being in hell. He reads her mind, and she's figured out that he's gay because vampires have like cunty fingernails that look like they're always manicured, and he's wearing cunty little sunglasses tonight so he can pretend the eye doctor says that he has eye problems. I don't know. His relationship with his sister is still okay though, so he goes inside and gives her a hug, and he can tell she's pregnant with twins because he can hear their hearts beating. He gives her money, so he's still like financially supporting his family even though she's now married. Fenwick sends his lawyer over to sign some paperwork, and the lawyer is a fucking racist. And he's like, you're so clever, and taps Louis on the fucking head. Like, what is wrong with you people? And then Louis is falling back into this like Stepin Fetchit kind of persona, I guess. But as the lawyer leaves, he says, you really are an exceptional. And Louis tells Daniel, they all came from an organ inside me, unknown to science at the time, because what scientists would look for an organ inside a black man, he used his weakness to rise. But I was not a man anymore. I had power now, and decades of rage to process. And Louis eats that fucker. Get his ass. But Lestat, who definitely would have radical leftist scum in his Instagram bio, is mad. He loads the body into their new little incinerator and he's like, people will notice he's missing. He's a big shot lawyer. What were you thinking? And Louis is like, he disrespected me and tries to explain for what is clearly the billionth time that he is a black gay Creole man in America. And Lestat occupies a very different position from him in society as a white French bisexual man. And then Lestat is like, you need to show restraint, fledgling. And Louis is like, you need to stop calling me fledgling because that word is starting to sound a little like slave. And Lestat is like, oh, you stop calling me racist. That day, I guess, yeah, because they sleep during the day. In their cabins, Lestat is like, I don't like going to bed angry. If disrespect was done to you, I would have killed him myself. Which, like, Lestat, what do you mean if disrespect was done to him? Disrespect was done to him. So then Lestat, love bombing little bitch boy, is like, hey, what can I do to make it up to you, baby? And Louis is like, I want to buy the Fair Play Saloon. So Lestat lends him the money, and he does. And things are going pretty well. Louis starts paying everybody better. He has Bricks managing it. He desegregates it. He also renames it the Azalea, and he and Lestat can use it as a hunting ground. But as he had signed the paperwork, Fenwick, God, I hate him, said, that's a mighty tall ladder you're climbing. So, remember that, guys. These little white bitches are starting to feel kind of threatened. Ew, gross, ew. Louis goes to visit Grace, whose opinion towards him is clearly souring. She's mad that he's never around, and like whenever he is around, it's during the night. He never goes to daytime functions. He's a vampire, guys, that's why. She then has him hold his baby nephew while she goes and checks on the twins, and he almost eats the baby. Now I can show you an unhinged Eric Bogosian Instagram post. For those of you putting away laundry, it is a photo of him leaning over, I assume, his grandchild, and the caption is, I ate the baby. Somebody get this man offline. Somebody make this man stop liking fan fiction and RPF edits. Louis tells Daniel, I no longer kill. I want our readers to understand that. And Daniel is like, did you eat the baby? Louis responds that most vampires are still, quote, slaves to the blood and are tired of hiding out in the shadows. Daniel asks if COVID is the opening they've been waiting for, and Louis confirms this. He says that there's a, quote, brute in Madagascar that called it the Great Conversion. Daniel's like, good luck with that. Most people like being outside during the day. It's so real, Daniel. And Louis starts naming disenfranchised people that would probably like to have some superhuman power. And then Daniel keeps interrupting by going, did you eat the baby? And then they get interrupted by a muscly Russian dude called Damek, whom Louis drinks from as he and Daniel, like, have a normal conversation. Like, Damek tells Daniel to go do touristy stuff. He's like, go to Kites Beach. It's good. Kites. Then he gets up and he passes out from the blood loss. That man just goes down. It's like an earthquake, probably. He's huge. Back to the interview. Louis left that baby on the floor and ran away. He goes home and cries to Lestat, and I think this is the first time we see that vampires actually cry tears of blood. It's sexy. Lestat is like, yeah, this is why you should cut your family off, because you might eat their babies. And Louis is like, I'm never gonna have a kid or family someday. And Lestat is like, I'm your family now. Remember this is foreshadowing. And Louis is like, I'm a shitty vampire. You should just throw me in the incinerator and make a better one. And Lestat is like, no, don't kill yourself. You're so sexy. Also, what if we went to the opera? And Louis is like, I just almost fucking ate my nephew. What do you mean, what if we went to the opera? And Lestat is like, no, I've been neglecting our romance. So let's go to the opera. Louis tells Daniel that Lestat is very charming and the earth felt like liquid when he was with him. So he's very much in Lestat's thrall. At the opera, Louis has to pretend to be Lestat's valet until the lights dim. Even though he's walking behind Lestat and everything, patrons still stare at him. It seems like to me that this part of high society is so segregated that there aren't even like black servants allowed, but I just don't have a lot of background about this time period and New Orleans and racial relations. But yeah, the lights dim, he sits next to Lestat. He says that Lestat loved music and that was how he separated man from food, and that it was nice to see that Lestat too, had human attachments, even as he's telling Louis to get rid of his. But alas, the tenor is just not very good. So Lestat takes him back to the house and humiliates him by having him repeat the song over and over, the song he's been like fucking up in the opera. Louis says it's been 6 years since the tractor salesman, but he still hates eating people, and he hates Lestat's style of hunting even more because Lestat likes to humiliate his victims first. Yet he and Lestat still spend hours draining the tenor together because he is very in love with Lestat in a probably very unhealthy way. I think there's probably something to like him being unequal to Lestat at the opera until the lights go down and then they're in the darkness, and then he can like kind of have like the illusion of equality with Lestat as he watches the opera. Dessert is served in Dubai. Louis is eating the dessert as well as he tries to have one human dish a week to maintain the thread. This contrasts pretty heavily to when he was visiting his sister earlier, when he almost ate his nephew. She offered him some gumbo and he didn't eat it. He says that the food tastes like chalk when Daniel asks. He also says that he chose that dessert because of an offhanded remark in Daniel's memoir. It's the dessert he had in Paris after he proposed to his first wife. After reminiscing about her for a bit, he closes the laptop and they finish their food in silence. This episode is interesting to me because we're seeing a more human side of Lestat with like how much he respects music and he won't eat people that are good at music, I guess, and that's a human attachment. And we're seeing Louis struggle with his remaining humanity and his remaining attachment to humanity. And we're also seeing Daniel humanized in a lot of ways because yeah, Daniel is human, but we've mostly been seeing this front of him as like a brash reporter who's very sarcastic and like, you know, has these one-liners and these little quips, and instead at the end of this episode we're hearing him talk about things that he loved about his first wife, like she used to dye part of her eyebrow because it used to be blonde. Episode 3 is My Very Nature That of the Devil. So instead of getting some Daniel Malloy foreplay, we're launched right into Louis and Lestat sitting in a square. Lestat is reading about the history of the square out loud to Louis. Louis is like, does the book say that they used to execute runaway slaves here? And Lestat awkwardly is like, well, I haven't gotten to that part yet. I think one could be generous and say that Lestat is excited about what he is reading and wants to share it with Louis, or one could read this scene as Lestat mansplaining the history of Louis's city to him. I tend towards the ungenerous when it comes to both men and the French, so I'm gonna go with the latter. Louis then asks Lestat if he thinks they were put on the earth for a higher purpose because he is reading like some philosophy or like evolution book, something kind of higher brow, which frustrates Lestat a little bit because much like Lea Michele, Lestat low-key can't read. What? I didn't say anything. Lestat is then like, I put you on this earth to enjoy yourself. Louis talks about how they can drink animal blood and be okay, and Lestat is like, okay, but why would you want to just be okay? Like, you could be feeling awesome all the time. Louis says that maybe they should use their mind powers to find and eat only the worst people, and Lestat is like, that just feels like another restraint you're putting on yourself. And Louis is like, okay, but what if we tried it just for tonight? And so I was like, oh my gosh. So the first person they come upon is a drunk who is thinking about trying not to piss himself as he walks home. And Lestat is like, should we eat him? He's drunk. And Louis is like, no, that's not a crime. What? The next person stole $18 from his mom's dresser to buy a new suit. Lestat is like, what about him? He's a thief. And Louis is like, that's petty larceny? No. Which I did look it up, and that is $500 just about in today's money, which is like a lot, but we still shouldn't eat him. I agree with Louis. Anyway, the third person is also drunk and he's thinking, stupid people, everyone is stupid, everything is stupid or whatever. And Lestat doesn't suggest anything with that guy, but Louis is like, well, we should eat him. He steals from poor people in like tenement houses or whatever. And it's kind of interesting that Lestat suggested eating the first two people who are black and not this third guy who's white, and worse, Lestat, you have things to answer for. So Lestat breaks his back in the back of an alley and Louis still can't kill him and like grabs a cat and drinks from it instead. Lestat looks disgusted. So they're back at the Be Azalea, which reminder used to be the Fair Play. Louis has hired a new woman to sing jazz who actually had heard of the club all the way in Atlanta. She's over there. Actually, I'm gonna just move her so my head's not blocking her. There you go. Antoinette. She's very talented. Louis tells Lestat he no longer wants to kill people, and Lestat compares him to a fish that doesn't swim and a bird that doesn't fly, which I'm sure is great for Louis' self-esteem. I'm sure that's great for him. Good job, Lestat. Then out of nowhere, Lestat is like, piano guy, you have been playing the same thing all night long. Have you lost your goddamn passion? And piano guy is like, okay, you come up here and play then. And Lestat is like, okay, sure. And Louis warns him that, quote, this ain't his kind of music. Lestat responds, quote, you can pretend you're a vegetarian. I can pretend the fool. Then he starts playing Minuet in G major. The crowd boos and calls him a virgin. It's like if the worst guy you know who has radical leftist scum in his Instagram bio and read White Fragility once and now thinks he knows the most about racism ever put Weezer on at the function, okay? That's the vibe. But then Lestat starts playing a jazzier version and piano guy joins back in and everybody's happy again, whatever. Louis says that later Lestat told him that there was actually nothing wrong with fucking Jelly Rolls playing, just that he was gonna leave Louis high and dry and run off and play in Chicago with a band. And by the way, I don't mean like Jelly Roll like this motherfucker, this like pro-ice Jason ass, blah 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 blah. No, I mean Jelly Roll Morton, one of the pioneers of jazz, who wrote the Wolverine Blues, except Louis is like, yeah, if I'm not mistaken, Lestat improv'd the melody that would become the Wolverine Blues that night. Daniel's like, you're fucking with me. You're fucking with me. He pulls up the Wolverine Blues, and Louis is like, yeah, that's right. Yeah, Lestat wrote that. Yeah, Lestat. Now that we've shifted back to Dubai, Daniel has the chance to comment about Louis' rewrite of Lestat and say that it's giving him pause. He pulls up a clip from the 1973 interview in which Louis is saying things that I think are actually direct quotes from Anne Rice's book, because the book is just the 1973 interview basically, and the show is imagining like, okay, what if the 1973 interview happened but then a book didn't get published out of it and now we're writing the book in 2022, whatever, okay? But yeah, the quote is like, he was a sowsier out of which nothing fine could be made. I was his complete superior, and I was sadly cheated for having him as a teacher. And then Daniel compares this to a few more clips in their current interview. Louis responds that the 2022 version is the more nuanced portrait. Daniel suggests it's simply the more rehearsed version, but Louis quotes a passage from Daniel's own book to him. Quote, I am in my Buick staring at my rear view mirror at my daughter in the car seat. An hour after I give Derek, a guy I don't know, the last $30 I had. My editor reminds me it's 7 years before car seats are mandatory. My ex-wife reminds me I never owned a Buick. This is the odyssey of recollection. Louis then says, half a century later, allow me my odyssey. The showrunners have said that they tried to blend Lestat's characterization in Interview with the Vampire with his characterization in the follow-up novel, The Vampire Lestat, which is like written from the POV of Lestat. He's like pissed off that he got bad-mouthed in Interview with the Vampire, and he's like, this is my autobiography actually, guys. And you know, in Interview with the Vampire, yeah, he deadass is abusive, but in The Vampire Lestat, like, you know, I'm only halfway done, it's a much longer book, but it's kind of camp. Like, he's kind of just camp. I also do think that the showrunners got very, very lucky with Sam Reed, because that is like a very textbook abuser behavior, but Sam Reed does just do such a good job capturing like this enigmatic vibe that Lestat is supposed to have. Lestat fills in for, once again, fucking Jelly Roll Morton, and therefore starts getting closer with Antoinette. Louis is constantly exhausted from eating only rats, his libido is down, and he, quote, let the affair happen, his words, not mine. Lestat invites Antoinette back to their house and then starts making out with her in front of Louis, which he also did that with Miss Lily. This seems to be like his weird little power play fetish. Louis like walks out in a huff, which is fucking fair. Then he comes back and he asks Lestat if she burned quick, but Lestat is like, oh, I didn't kill her because she's a talented singer. Louis then asks why he isn't enough for Lestat, who starts laughing and is like, we'll be together literally forever. She's nothing to me. I just want a little variety from time to time. Louis is like, so I can fuck whoever I want then. And Lestat is taken aback, but then he's like, yeah, I totally won't be jealous. Yeah, sure. These two are giving like the worst straight people you know, who are basically just doing infidelity, but they insist upon calling it ethical non-monogamy. A guy comes looking for Louis at the Azalea. It's his childhood friend Jonah, who I thought I had a picture of, but I do not. Anyways, they talk a bit and Louis is like, I want to take a drive in my super fast car. Jonah has enlisted partially because he's hoping it'll be a way for him to rise as a darker skinned black man in America, but also because he's heard about European sensibilities about caring less about, quote, what you look like and who you look at. It comes up in a roundabout way that he and Louis used to hook up. Louis says he's got someone, but that someone is a lot, and they have an agreement. So then Jonah goes down on Louis, and Louis bites his arm to keep himself from eating this dude. Back home, Louis and Lestat talk. Louis asks how Antoinette is because Lestat is acting kind of weird about Jonah, and Lestat is like, tedious. These affairs always flame out. So he's allegedly gonna kill her soon. We hear that again. But Louis notices that there's some mud on Lestat's shoes, and it was muddy out in the bayou. Daniel then asks Louis if it was raining that night. Now, in the memory thus far, it was not, but then we see another clip of the same conversation with Jonah where it is raining. Louis looks kind of bothered by this for a minute, but then he's like, it could have been raining and muddy in the bayou and dry in the quarter. Louis learned from Jonah that Grace and them are throwing a birthday party for the twins. He shows up that night. The mom is wearing a big ass like crucifix and is like, you're not allowed into the house. And Louis is like, I own this house and I just want to drop off a present for Grace and the girls. Like, I just want to see Grace, because he still had a good relationship with Grace up until this point. But then Grace is like, I do not want you here, because he had like kicked the door down and then it caused the door to like completely go off its hinges because he's got vampire strength now. So yeah, they're all like, get out, we never want to see you again, and the twins are scared of him. And yeah, Grace has now turned her back on him pretty much completely. So that's pretty sad. He's lost connection with his family pretty much. So he goes back to the house and, you know, probably he just wants to go and cry. That's what I would want to do, but he can't because there's fucking drunk soldiers everywhere that are singing and being as loud as goddamn possible. That's exactly what happens when you get overstimulated. Suddenly a drunk soldier comes and is like as loud as possible. Lestat invited them over because the power at the Azalea had been cut off due to ordinances, because the city has been passing these ordinances that are like, you can't have mixed race like sporting houses, but you know, pretty much the only person it's affecting is Louis. Yeah, allegedly they're cracking down on brothels. They're just cracking down on the black owned ones first, because of course they are. He also invited them over because he thought Louis would be pleased, because soldiers are clearly Louis's type. I mean, he, you know, hooked up with his childhood friend who happened to be a soldier. Now he's just whatever. Louis is like, you need to make them leave right fucking now. So Lestat starts concentrating and he hypnotizes them all. He like mind blahs them, and they all stand up and they like very robotically walk out. And then Lestat out of nowhere is like, what can I say? I'm a lot. And Louis is like, I fucking knew you were there. I fucking knew you were there. And is like, why are you jealous? You have Antoinette. And Louis is like,
He did me some face and I drove him home.
and Lestat is like,
I heard you're outstanding!
and Louis is like,
You watched the whole thing like some creeper.
and Lestat is like,
And I watched you pull over and drain a dog and run down an alleyway for 2 more rats. This is not a life.
Louis then says that's because Lestat took his life. He lost his brother, he lost his family, and now he's about to lose the last thing he cares about, the Azalea. That's gotta suck if you're right there, Lestat, but Lestat, you suck. So I said that I love Sam Reed. I love Sam Reed's Lestat. I just love to hate him. I'm sorry. But like, here's the thing. Lestat's choice of a fair partner, Antoinette, does play in to a lot of Louis' insecurities. She's a woman and she's white. And I think there is like a really particular pain. I'm saying this as a bi person, to be clear, when a person you're flirting with chooses somebody of the opposite sex. But yeah, it's this insecurity, right, of like, if Lestat were to choose Antoinette, his life would be a lot easier. Like, he wouldn't have to have his partner trailing behind him and like wait until it was dark to sit next to him at the opera house, for example. And Lestat is jealous of Jonah, in my and other people's opinions, partially because Jonah is black. Lestat likes to think he's more worldly than Louis, and he like knows more about everything, especially vampirism, but he can never know more about being a black man in America than Louis can. And the fact that Louis potentially could have somebody that he relates to on that level is really threatening to Lestat. But yeah, if you're my IRL friends and watching this, you now know where my "this is not a life" vocal stim comes from. Maybe this Autism Awareness Month I'll finally get tested for something. Louis goes to meet with Fenwick and Anderson. They're like, yeah, wow, it's just like a crazy coincidence that the council that we're literally on is going after the Black-owned businesses first. Like, that's crazy. They're like the main people that attend the Azalea. Oh my god, guys, I hate them. So then Fenwick is thinking some truly vile thoughts about Louis and how like he got what was coming to him because he basically stops just shy of calling Louis uppity in his thoughts. But Louis plucks out of his mind that Anderson, who is generally less like overtly racist, I would say, so Louis kind of feels more allied with him, purposefully sold him the fair play because he knew these ordinance days were coming because he's also like in government, right? Louis is like, hey, you sold me this property to screw me over. It was like a fucking cowshe bed. And Fenwick is like, well, I'll buy it back for you, like, for 15 cents on the dollar. What a... So Louis is pissed. Lestat doesn't understand why Louis didn't just take the money. And you know, Lestat, for all that talk of, well, if he had disrespected you, I would have eaten him myself. I haven't seen you eat a lot of racists. Have you seen him eat a racist? Louis, who describes himself as manic at this point, puts a colored people only sign on the Azalea. He neglects his thirst and it, quote, grew harder. A cop then shows up at the Azalea and like is reading him a final order for closure, and on the list is broken windows, and Louis is like, what fucking, there's no fucking broken windows, and another cop like takes his baton and breaks them, and they're like, oh, that broken windows. And as all this is happening, people are like staring and like pointing at it, and all this is happening while fucking Fenwick is like, I don't, showing some like city council or tourist or somebody around like, see, we don't like brothels, we love good old American values. I've never been to a brothel in my life. Like, sir, you are Kristi Noem's husband, okay? You are the politician that passes Don't Say Gay and then spikes Grindr usership during every Republican fucking convention. Louis says that cats and rats would no longer satiate his hunger, and Daniel says, take a black man in America, make him a vampire, fuck with that vampire, and see what comes of it. So Louis breaks into Fenwick's house and eats his racist ass, and then strigs him up on a church gate with his guts all out and a whites only sign. I can finally just... Didn't even make a good sound. What I will say is Louis was definitely playing with his food a la Lestat. Like, he made it clear he can read Fenwick's thoughts and lets Fenwick shoot at him a few times. But I think Fenwick is a worse person than a tenor who can't sing well, and that is my hot take and I will stand by it. Anyways, Lestat is like, OMG, I imagine the drama, you're into killing now, we should make this our anniversary. And Louis is like, I didn't do it for me, I did it for my city, I did it for my people. And Lestat keeps insisting like, oh no, you had fun with it, you keep telling yourself that, but you did it for you at the end of the day. And while all this is happening, white people are fucking torching Storyville in revenge. Louis tells Lestat, that's why you and me are never gonna work. That's why you're always gonna be alone, which, you know, pisses Lestat off because he's very scared of being alone. But Louis runs off into the night and begs people to like tell him how to help them. And one man tells him like, don't try to help, just run, because this guy like doesn't want Louis to also get caught up by this racist mob. He's comparing himself to a child that had tested his strength on a bird, crushing it, who is asking how to put it back together again. Then he hears a young girl crying. She's trapped in a rooming house. He runs through the fire. To paraphrase Louis, he could not save the Azalea Storyville, the aunt that was on the wrong side of the wall, but he could save her, quote, my light, my Claudia, my redemption. Oh, thank God, I finally get to put her. Finally get to put her on the board. Oh yeah, I love you. Episode 4, The Ruthless Pursuit of Blood with a Child's Demanding. It's a sunny afternoon in Dubai. We know this because Daniel is outside giving his agent some non-answers about where he is, After he hangs up, Rashid is like, you were scheduled for a round of levodopa infusion this week. And Daniel is like, did you guys have my phones tapped? Like, what is happening? Rashid does not answer this, but he does say Mr. Dupont du Lac is having a physician come to do it. Quote, Mr. Dupont du Lac is having a physician come to do it. Your doctor consented. You have a note from him in your electronic mailbox. Daniel's like, okay, where's Louis? And Rashid is like, he's resting today. You're gonna be in the reading room. The reading room is a big cement box with some bookshelves and a like magnolia tree surrounded by gravel in the center. Rashid hands him some gloves and points him to a table which is covered with diaries. He tells Daniel, we suggest you start from the left. Rashid leaves and Daniel immediately picks up the diary on the right because he's fucking Daniel. Entry is Paris, 1945, and then he grabs another one and reads about how the POWs are not very great tasting, and it's dated in 1941. So then he moves to the first diary. This episode, from Claudia's POV, baby. So Claudia, my love, she is getting pulled out of that burning house. She describes Louis as the black angel and says he brought her to a fancy house. She thought she was in heaven, but she was still in pain, so she was confused. Then the white angel, Lestat, came, and Lestat asks Louis what Claudia will be, a lapdog, a daughter, and reminds Louis that he was about to abandon their home, which feels a bit melodramatic, but that's Lestat for you. Lestat also has some reservations because Claudia, very young. But Louis is like, I don't know like what she'll be to us. I just need her to live. Please save her. So Lestat turns her. After the whole dying process, they show Claudia around the house. Claudia asks what the incinerator is for. Lestat tells her it's to burn the bodies of their victims, but Louis like shushes him before he can get all that out. So Lestat is like the fun divorced dad with a really flashy, fast car, and Louis is the helicopter overprotective dad, I guess. Louis immediately tells Claudia that they can hear each other's thoughts instead of sitting on that info like Lestat did. They start having a conversation mentally, and Lestat is like, what you saying? To Louis, but they're yapping, so his focus is on Claudia, and Lestat is like, right, I can see where this is going, and vampire speed runs over to Claudia because he needs everyone to be paying attention to him at all times. Sometimes Lestat is kind of relatable, I fear. She's like, how'd you do that? And he's like, I'll tell you in time, but only if we don't keep family secrets. And she's like, we're a family? And Louis is like, yeah, one without secrets. Lestat is keeping secrets, but not immediately teaching her how to run super fast, but nobody asks me these things, I guess. They then take Claudia out to hunt. She is acting like a kid that's been given regular chicken nuggets instead of dino nuggets for the first time, so Louis is like, yay, she takes after me, she's not gonna eat people, but then she speed runs away. And they're like, get back here, young lady. That's a direct quote. She pretends to be like a lost little girl and eats a cop who, like, to be fair, was being pretty rude. He was like, little girl, where are your parents? Being very annoying. Claudia said a cab. They go back home and Louis is like, we can't just eat cops. They're really noticeable when they go missing because he like hates fun, I guess. Then Claudia starts whining that she's still hungry and Louis is like, you just ate? And Lestat is like, her teenager appetite is gonna be permanent. This is not a good sign. Claudia writes in her diary that she doesn't really like human food anymore and demonstrates this by smashing a random macaron into the wall. And like, why did these vampires have a macaron tower in their house? Just who's to say? She also writes that she's pretty into killing people now, and Lestat, whom she calls Uncle Les, and her call it kill juice. Then she sticks her hand under the skylight as she's going upstairs to coffin, and Louis and Lestat are like, it's time to go to bed, young lady. She's actually not super into the fact that she has to sleep during the day because it's preventing her from being around people her own age. So she's writing in her diary before she goes to bed. While they're like, you know, in their little coffins going to sleep, she asks Lestat who made him, which actually this scene is silly to me because it's just like two coffins, little voices coming out of them. Anyways.
Put the pen down, Claudia.
Uncle, is that our question? You may me, and you may Louis. Who may you?
Lestat refuses to answer, and eventually both he and Louis open up their coffins and start like arguing with each other in French. Claudia thinks this is funny. I don't speak French because there's too many vowels, so I know from the subtitles that Lestat is like, must she question everything? And Louis is like, she's a teenager, all they do is question everything, which is pretty good foreshadowing for Claudia's character overall. God, I love Claudia. They go to get her a coffin of her own because she's been sharing with bestie Daddy Lou, she's not acting very normal about it, unfortunately, guys. She's super excited and she's like, it's so soft. Louis tries to tell the coffin seller that Claudia has a heart condition and they're trying to get her used to the idea of her dying, and the seller does not. He does not buy it. So they do eat him. I was watching an interview with Jacob Anderson and Bailey Bass, who plays Claudia, and apparently her coffin was actually like much more comfy than his, so he'd just hang out there during film breaks, which, like, if I was on Gay Vampire Show and there was a comfy coffin to chill in, you could not pull me out of that comfy coffin in the Gay Vampire Show. I would be a terrible actor because I just love to sleep. Like, I want to go home is always what's rattling around in my head, and I'm home right now. Now that she has her own coffin, she does see Dot climb into Louis' coffin and hears them kissing. So when she and Louis are out on the bayou so he can eat some fish, she asks him how loving another man works. And he says it works like love, which I think is actually a really lovely way to describe queerness. I do think that Claudia's acceptance actually does make Louis less ashamed of his sexuality as well. She asks Louis if he likes girls as well, and he says he used to pretend to, but Lestat does. Then she asks if he's going out to see women when he like goes off by himself. Louis responds that sometimes Lestat's kills get extravagant, and Lestat keeps them away from Louis out of respect. He admits to Claudia that the house fire that killed her aunt was because of an extravagant kill of his, and is like, listen, it's fine if what you want to do is to kill people. You don't have to, like, you know, eat fish and shit like me, but you do have to kill them quickly. Don't kill them extravagantly in the way Lestat does. Also, Claudia points out that Lestat does have secrets that he sits on like a throne, even though they're not supposed to. Thank you, get his ass, Claudia. Daniel hears what I think is the afternoon call to prayer for Muslim people, and he walks over to the living room where Rashid is praying. Daniel then fucking interrupts him and is like, I thought Louis was your god. What does Muhammad have to say about vampires? Because, like, in an earlier episode, Daniel was trying to figure out why Rashid worked for Louis and was like, are you guys fucking? And Rashid was like, I serve a god and it is my honor, or something like that. I don't know. Anyways, Rashid is like, do you have what you need, Mr. Malloy? And Daniel, very deadpan, is like, a cure for Parkinson's. Rashid asks how reading is going, and Daniel says, well, for a killing machine, I kind of like her. Exactly, Daniel. Finally, a good fucking take from somebody in this show. Daniel is then like, sorry, you were praying. To which Rashid responds, Asar Nomozi. And then Daniel is like, that's not Arabic. I thought you were a Dubai native. And Rashid responds, Dubai is a child, Mr. Malloy. No one's a native. It's not explicitly stated in this show, but I do think this is Urdu from my, like, very basic Googlings. Asr is the prayer said between noon and sunset, so we do know what time of day it is. I do think Dubai is a super interesting setting for the show. It definitely makes sense from, like, a privacy perspective. That's a pretty big draw for celebrities that live there, for example. The show also demonstrates a love of place that I think is very inherited from the book. The intro is literally Dubai skyline rising out of New Orleans, and it makes this like really cool, like, it almost looks like a vampire jaw opening. It's very, very fun. I personally like the show better than the source material, but one of the things I really do like about the books is that you can tell how much Anne Rice loves San Francisco, which is where, like, the present portion of the book takes place, and then also New Orleans, which is where a lot of the, like, Louis story part of the book takes place. And I think that love of place definitely comes up in Louis' flowery descriptions of New Orleans, and then in the second season, like, his descriptions of Paris. And I think, like, in popular culture, Dubai is definitely associated with modernity, whereas New Orleans and Paris have a very deep history, especially, like, for the United States when it comes to New Orleans, right? I also think you have to be a certain kind of person to live in Dubai. I'll get more into that at some other point, probably. Daniel switches to Claudia's next diary. She's gotten her own room, which is hidden behind a super sick rotating wall, living my dream. Lestat tries to come in and she yells at him that he has to knock, which is such a like normal teenage girl thing to say, but like we know that there's a coffin behind her. Very silly, goofy. It's her birthday and she blows out a candle on a cake. What is she gonna do with that cake? Lestat gives her like a necklace with a big ass jewel on it that he says is from like French nobility or something. He like ate somebody and got it several hundred years ago, whatever. And then she puts it on and she's like, Daddy Lou, when am I gonna grow into this? And Louise, anxious, avoidant ass, responds, haha, we'll get one your size. Explain to her that she's not gonna age, my guy. Claudia tells the diary that they do like mortals do. They dance around together. They go see what I think is Nosferatu and laugh the whole time. There's a really cute scene where Lestat is mimicking Nosferatu's iconic walk. Claudia says that when Louis and Lestat argue, she can always get in between them, which is not healthy. That's not healthy at all, guys. That's not healthy. But according to her, the happy times end when Louis gets a phone call. His mom has died. So Louis does take Claudia and Lestat to the funeral. And Grace is like, a random little girl, what are you doing here? And Claudia is like, I've never seen a dead one look so peaceful before. Do you know what her last words were? And Grace is like, what the fuck? Louis comes over and she's pretty mad that he brought this random ass girl he's adopted and Lestat to the funeral, which like, yeah, that's a little bit fair. She tells Louis that she wants the house. Levy offers to pay him in installments for it, but Grace very coldly is like, you don't need the money, we want the house. So Louis agrees, and then he, Lestat, and Claudia roll out. He's kind of given up on his old family for the new one that he's built. Lestat takes Claudia to a lover's lane, allegedly to teach her how to kill 2 people at once, but also I think low-key as sex ed, which like is still probably better than the sex ed I got at public schools. She watches one of the couples making out for a while, then does kill the guy, and there's like blood spatter all over the windshield. It's a very classic slasher movie. The girl almost gets away, so Lestat eats her, and you can hear like the car rocking in the background as Claudia eats the guy, which I think that's a fun touch, right? Because usually we associate that sound with people, you know, doing it, but instead it's Claudia doing a vampire rite of passage of learning to kill 2 people at once instead of like a human girl of that age rite of passage of like making out in a car. But Claudia says, I can't quite put into words, but something opened up in my mind and in my body. I've been 18 for 7 months now, and it's time I start acting like it. So the next night she comes downstairs wearing a flapper dress that she stole off of a victim. Louis and Lestat, thankfully, are like, oh, you look nice. Louis mentally then tells her not to do something he wouldn't do, to which she responds that she's going to tell Lestat he's talking to her, quote, that way, which, like, does she mean telling her what to do, or does she mean talking to her mentally in a way that Lestat can't hear? Some girls who are like standing on a street corner say literally out loud, oh, she probably stole from her mom's closet, and then also like slur getting dressed up in the dark. And like Claudia had been feeling pretty confident, but they've just destroyed that because like these girls are around her actual age, but she still looks 14 because that's when she was turned. So she's pretty upset, but then a horse rears up and scares her, and the guy driving the carriage with the horse is like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, and he gives her a ride home, and that's it. She's got a crush. His name is Charlie, by the way. He's over there. But yeah, she's barely eating, she's barely sleeping, and like as soon as it hits 9:30, she runs out onto her balcony because he like drives a guy home past their balcony every night, and Louis is yelling like, no running in the house, so she starts to skip instead, and Lestat is like, no skipping either, which like the juxtaposition of like they're just being girl dads and also they're all vampires. Like, anyways, Charlie tosses a bouquet to her. She and Charlie go out and get ice cream. She asks him if he always takes his dates there, and he's like, okay, this is not a date, you're really young. And she responds that she's 19, which like she is 19 years old. And he's like, no way, you're older than me. So she starts to tell him about a toy shop that was in the area and had closed several years ago, which does convince him that she's 19 because, again, she is 19, so she's just like recounting her memories of this toy shop that she wouldn't have been able to remember if she was actually still 14 because she would have been a baby at the time, whatever. So that convinces him of her age, and they go make out in his carriage. But remember, she has not been eating. And in the heat of the moment, she bites him and she drains him dry. She brings him back to the house and begs Lestat to turn him, but he's like, nah, he's too dead. And then makes her watch as he burns the fucking body and is like, this is why we don't get too close to mortals. Lestat, why? So we cut back to Daniel, who's clearly overwhelmed. He's like, wait, you know when old guys are like, they're like wearing their glasses and then they're like, he's like that. He also then hears like the fading voice of Louis saying, it'll be okay, you have us. And Claudia saying, I don't want you. Louis walks in. Daniel asks where all these diaries were in 1973. Louis says that they were scattered, and Daniel calls bullshit. Louis says Claudia was his everything and that he loved her unconditionally. Louis then asks if Daniel were to come across his own daughter's diaries, which like very vividly detailed how and when he had failed them over and over, if he would share those failures with the brash young reporter that he met at Polynesian Mary's, which is the gay bar that they met at, which is a real gay bar in San Francisco. It's no longer right now. It's cool. Louis then says that Charlie's death shattered their fragile sense of peace. Oh, whoops. But like, remember, according to Claudia, it was actually Louis's mom's death that really set in motion everything going wrong. Louis and Lestat argue in English about how Lestat treated Claudia. Claudia proceeds to have a mental breakdown in her coffin, like she's laughing and crying, and then asks her diary how she's supposed to wake up every evening in the, quote, flat-chested, hairless-crotched body of a 14-year-old as her mind and spirit turn 19, 20, 25. She continues, well, let me tell you something, you stuck-up, flower-covered, $3 fancy fucking paper diary. I'm doing just fine. Her reasoning for that is because the first man that she killed called her the devil, the cop, and the last boy that she killed, the last boy that she'll ever love, Charlie, called her an angel. This means she's on the right path, and there's so much more fun to have. And then she does the Louis classic of holding her arm under the skylight as it burns. So in the books, Claudia is actually turned at 5 years old. This is because Anne Rice actually had a daughter that died around that age, and she wrote Interview with the Vampire to cope with it, which is part of why she was really like about fan fiction and tried to sue a bunch of writers. I like that they aged Claudia up in the show because I think being stuck as a young teenager forever, especially because 14-year-olds kind of want to be treated like adults a lot of the time, is uniquely horrifying in a lot of ways. It honestly reminds me of gender dysphoria a lot because how people perceive Claudia is so incongruous to who she knows herself to be, and that causes so much mental anguish for her, which like canonically anything vampires physically change about themselves reverses itself super quickly. Like, if they cut their hair, it grows back to its original length right away.
And if I cut my hair again?
It will grow back again.
So I'm sort of like, damn, what about trans vampires? Which actually, that could be kind of interesting for the show to pick up that concept, especially with certain characters in The Vampire Lestat. I think there's also commentary on the adultification of young black girls to be made, which Princess Weeks talks about in her video. Episode 5. A Vile Hunger for Your Hammering Heart. This episode opens with Louis drinking from Rashid across from Daniel. Everybody's making fucking eye contact. Daniel is reading a section of Claudia's diary, which is just like people's last words. Claudia would love a spreadsheet. Daniel's like, I'm trying to think of something more fucked up than this. This is a kill list. And Rashid is like, how is your work any different? Once your book is published, vampires will scale the walls of this skyscraper and kill him. Louis, you're chronicling a suicide. Louis says Rashid is an opinionated young man, even when his opinions are not solicited. Louis then reads Daniel's mind and is like, you're wondering what he tastes like? It's honey and pineapple. He stuffs himself with it for days before I drink from him. Want a sample? And Daniel's like, I'm more of a savory guy. I'm just gonna wait until Demek gets back. And Rashid, who's standing at this point, is like, I would not let you near my fucking neck. Louis interrupts and is like, he weighs 62.5 kilos. Rashida's like, what? And Louis is like 138 pounds for the metrically challenged. Thanks for saving me the Google, Louis. Daniel here was wondering how much you weighed. Daniel is like, stay out of my head? Like, what? So Louis thinks that Claudia is on a hunger strike post Charlie. So he keeps putting like birds and stuff in her room to eat. Lestat thinks she's sneaking out to eat and then goes and wrenches her coffin open, and to prove it, she is in fact not there, but her diaries are, which he then proceeds to read. Am I going to be a virgin every time I do it? Won't my skin down there grow back like my hair does every time I cut it? Is the quote that makes him storm out of the room. Louis then flips through more pages. He finds the kill list, and the paper is spotted with red marks that could be like bloody fingerprints, but also because we know vampires like cry tears of blood, that could also be her tears. Claudia comes back and opens her coffin to find Lestat just like lying there, which like Sam Reed definitely has a few inches on Bailey Bass. So was Lestat just like curling himself up in a little like contortion ball for the drama of it all? She's mad that they read her diary. Louis is like, Claudia, where are the bodies buried? Where did you bury the bodies of all these people you've been eating? And she's like, oh, like way out, you know, in the countryside. And he's like, you didn't bury them far enough below the river line, so the next storm they're all gonna like wash back up, which does in fact happen. And then Lestat is like, you're so ungrateful. We read about it in the diary, which like, that's just how teenagers write about people. Louis and Lestat meet with Anderson at a speakeasy because it's prohibition, baby. Anderson is asking them for donations because he's running for the House of Representatives. He also says that there are hella bodies that have floated up from the storm. He's like, every corpse had a soft part of it lopped off, so they can't even be like, oh, it was just hurricane victims. Like, clearly there was some murdering happening. Anderson is also partially there to warn them that the cops are poking around, I guess. We still hate him though. They get back home and there's police fucking everywhere, whom Claudia, who is hella drunk, had let in. The police are like, why do you guys have an incinerator? And Louis and Lestat make up a whole story about like they are incinerator salesmen or something. Claudia, meanwhile, then starts cleaning up the dead and rotting bodies and like trophies of victims that are in her room, and it's gross. And then you know, police like kick down the door because they're like, we gotta go in her room, and she's like pretends that she's changing, so they don't search her room. But the cops do say that they will be watching Lestat and Louis, especially because there's only one bed upstairs and they don't like gay people, which like their coffins are all in like hidden rooms, so that's why they didn't find the coffins. But then I'm like, well, y'all don't sleep in the bed, so why can't you just have 2 bedrooms? Like, why can't you have 2 separate beds so this shit doesn't happen? Louis and Lestat start scolding Claudia, and Lestat is like, remember how happy we were before her, Louis? And Louis is like, no. Like, I just know Lestat would agree with Chaperone about children. Claudia is hella drunk because the guy she ate was hella drunk, and like, that's, you know, how blood alcohol works for vampires. And then she goes on a monologue. She says,
who am I supposed to love? You two have each other. Who's my Lestat? Who's my Louis? Not human. What human would want me? Perverts? Or little boys? And 40 years from now, still little boys? How are you gonna fix it, huh? Which one are you gonna fuck me?
Obviously, this scene is kind of disturbing, which is very much the point. In the books, Claudia is trapped in the body of a 5-year-old and kind of has a weirdly romantic relationship with Louis, which is also like, so this is kind of like a holdover from that situation. Lestat is terrible at parenting, and so his response is, well, you're not my type, I prefer a fuller figure. So we get him the Body Keeps Score. Somebody make him read that? I don't fucking know. I haven't read The Body Keeps Score. Claudia then admits that she's been trying to make other vampires, which everybody is mad about. She, for some reason, can't do it. She demands that Lestat make her a companion. He says no. Then she says, fine, if you won't do it, I will go find other vampires, because there are surely other vampires. And he's like, they will kill you because you are weak and a mistake. Louis then starts yelling at Lestat because you can't say that to your kid. Claudia is like, he treats us like shit and you just take it. Also, Lestat, why do you refuse me one lab when you have two? Guys, Antoinette is still on the board for a reason. He did not kill Antoinette. This never comes up and this never happens again. Louis tells Daniel that he doesn't want to have Claudia exploited, and Daniel is like, dude, once the book is published, I literally have no control over how people read her. And Louis is like, you can put the diaries in proper context, and Daniel is like, people are allergic to context these days. It will not help. But yeah, Claudia runs away. Louis is super depressed through the whole 1920s. The house is fucked up, guys. Complete disrepair. There's a raccoon wandering around in there. Lestat is feeling all ignored, so he's spending a lot of time with Antoinette because he's a baby. In the early 30s, after the stock market crash, we see Claudia. She's been going from college to college, reading a lot, that kind of thing. But she's being harassed by some frat bro. But then a guy on a motorcycle pulls up. It's another vampire. His name is Bruce. They eat the frat guy and burn the body. Claudia asks about the other vampire's maker. Bruce says that his maker was strange and European, which I don't know what else he would be because he was turned in Copenhagen. He says he had really good ears when he was alive, so even though Louis is really far away, he can hear Louis calling out for her mentally every night and being like, Claudia, come home, which she's surprised by. Then he's like, hey, you like to read, right? And he gives her a book that's etiquette for young ladies, then admits that he has been following her for weeks and mansplains how to dispose of bodies, even though he's like a lot younger than her, also like vampire years wise. Then after all of that, he tries to flirt with her and she's like, no, and tries to run away, but he breaks her legs and then it's implied sexually assaults her. I like when we don't show sexual assault on screen in shows. That's one of the reasons I find Hannibal soothing to watch, because I'm like, yeah, the worst things are gonna happen. Like, there'll be shitty stuff happening on screen. There's gonna be like horrible like gore, but we're not gonna see a sexual assault, and that's good for me. The 4 pages that probably detail that experience have been torn out of the diary. Daniel is like, can I read the pages? And Louis is like, no, again, I don't want her exploited. Daniel says that Louis' editorializing calls other elements of the story into question, then starts reading the pages leading up to the assault out loud. Louis gets pissed off and makes his hands shake a whole lot, which is ableism. That man has Parkinson's. Then Rashid comes in and like puts a hand on Louis' shoulder to stop him. He says that Louis would like to apologize and continue the interview. Before Rashid can finish the sentence, though, Daniel gets up and fucking slaps Louis. Then he sits back down and continues the interview. They're so dramatic. Louis gets a phone call. It's from Grace, who has him meet her at the cemetery. She says that her family is headed north because the Great Depression had like cleared them out, but she's like, I don't want any of your money. Don't offer your money. She shows him the crypt that she got for him and says that this is how things are gonna have to be. She kisses his cheek goodbye. So, she's not dead, but she and Levy can come off the board. We find out from Claudia's diary that she had been following Louis and Lestat by this point after the assault. So she saw Grace finally say, bye, Louis, see you never. So she decides that she was made to be Louis' sister. She comes home, but she says she's only coming home to pick Louis up because she wants to go to Eastern Europe with him. She's been reading about potential vampires from all the like university libraries that she was visiting. Lestat says that the European vampires are vicious, and when she looks like scared for a second, he figures out that something happened to her while she was away. She's like, to Louis, he's scared of being alone, and when he's scared, he ridicules. Lestat is like, she was a destitute little girl destined to live an inconsequential life, and Louis is like, we took that from her. She mentally is like, please come with me. And Lestat knows she's mind talking, so he gets pissed off because he's really scared Louis is gonna leave, and he chokes her out. Louis then attacks Lestat to get him off of her. We then are from like Claudia's POV again, and she's like limping after them because her leg got messed up, and like she hears them like physically fighting in another room, and she hears Lestat being like, I'm trying to restrain myself. Then they crash through the wall, and Lestat drags Louis downstairs by like hooking his fingers in Louis's neck. Claudia's like, "It's me you want." And Lestat is like, "I never wanted you." Then he says to Louis, "I chose you." Lestat bites Louis, then flies them up above the city, just way up high above the 1930 whatever New Orleans skyline. He's like to Louis, "I've waited for you to love me as I love you." He wants Louis to say, "Lestat, I'll never love you," to like, give him some closure or something. But Louis just says, "Let go of me," because the thing is, like, Louis, even if Lestat doesn't know it, this is a gothic romance, okay? And romance isn't like, like the genre romance, not like a romance era or whatever. It's a gothic romance, okay? Louis does in fact love Lestat, for better or for worse. So yeah, Louis is just like, "Let go of me," and Lestat is like, "Anything for you," and drops him from the fucking sky. Which, like, doesn't kill him, because it's not how you kill vampires. Have you never read any vampire media? That's not how you kill vampires, but it really fucks him up.
Also, just watching this back while editing, I feel like this scene is supposed to sort of parallel the scene where Louis and Lestat sleep together in episode 1, because, like, Lestat bites Louis and then they have floating vampire sex. Yeah, that's just a thought though.
Claudia comes over to him crying, and Lestat sort of like floats down and is hovering above the ground. And the episode ends with "Home is Where You're Happy" by Charles fucking Manson playing over the credits. Because, like, at one point Daniel compared Claudia to Charles Manson for a sec. He was like, "Yeah, Manson wrote some nice songs, Claudia wrote some nice diaries, they're both killers." But the shit is fucking wild. Like, I'm gonna be so honest, I love this show. I don't think this show is serious enough to have that be the end credits song. And also maybe I'm a little salty because I did start listening to it and I was like, "Oh, like this is a bop. This kind of slaps," and it fits, like, lyrically, it fits really well with the episodes. And then I looked it up and I did not add that to a playlist. I think another thing I can stand on my channel is I'm an anti-Charles Manson channel. I feel comfortable saying that. I feel comfortable saying none of his songs are on my playlists. Episode 6, Like Angels Put in Hell by God. So Louis takes a few months to heal. He's in a lot of pain. Claudia has to bring him rats to eat. He is routinely having like PTSD flashback dreams about falling, unfortunately. Louis says that Lestat described the flying as like floating as opposed to like Superman flying, and called it the cloud gift, which is something that mostly like really ancient vampires have. Daniel, who is like actively getting his levodopa infusion, is like, "Hey doc, did you know that there's a flying vampire apocalypse coming?" Louis asks Daniel if he's still dreaming about their first meeting in San Francisco. Daniel is like, "Yeah, I keep waking up right as you ask me back to your really shitty apartment." Daniel asks if Louis can fly, and then Louis does have a PTSD flashback of falling and is like, "No." Daniel then asks why Lestat never told Louis that he could fly, and Louis thinks that Lestat thought if he exposed all of his power to Louis, he would feel that their relationship was unequal and the relationship would suffer, which, like, your relationship is inherently unequal because of Lestat being white and you being a mixed race black man, and Lestat refusing to acknowledge that that gives him power and privilege in your relationship. Jesus Christ. This is the worst guy you know. He read White Fragility. He thinks he knows more about racism than POC people. He has radical leftist scum in his Instagram bio. So Lestat vanishes after that night. He later told Louis it was because he felt ashamed of his actions. Louis says that Claudia can always talk to him about what happened while she was gone, and says that she can even just like mentally tell him the guy's name if she wants. She refuses though. Even though Lestat is no longer living with them, he keeps calling the house and bringing Louis gifts to like try to win him back, like a shitty boyfriend who forgot Valentine's Day and is now trying to like hand his girlfriend 50% off roses. And also he has radical leftist scum in his Instagram bio and read White Fragility once and thinks he's the best man in the entire world for it. Oh, also, by the way, you might be like, where is he living? He's living in Algiers with fucking Antoinette. Still alive, still on the board. I don't even have anything against Antoinette. It's the problem. I don't have anything against her. So Lestat keeps sending Louis gifts for like 6 straight years. Finally, in 1937, he sends Louis a record, which is his first composition in 100 years. And it goes like, "Come to me."
Yeah.
When you get me and my 2 other friends that have watched this show together, that's like, we constantly are just saying that to each other. It's really, oh my god, this show is a problem for me. But anyways, you know, it's a duet, and there's a female part in the duet, and you know who is singing on the duet, on the female part of the duet? Is fucking Antoinette. Which is on purpose, to be clear. Like, it gets Louis mad enough that he runs to their house. Well, actually, he swims to their house to yell at them, and then he kicks Antoinette out of her own fucking house, and Lestat lets him, and then they sleep together. So they're back together. He and Claudia set a bunch of rules for Lestat before he can, like, move back into the house. One of them is kill Antoinette, another is treat Claudia like a sister, and then also, like, stop lying by omission. These are rules, like, 4, 5, and 6, by the way. I don't know what rules 1 through 3 were. Claudia then asks who made Lestat, and it's this guy Magnus. So Magnus took Lestat from his room in Paris and locked him in a cell where there were a bunch of, like, rotting corpses in varying stages of decay, but they all looked like Lestat, and then he fed on Lestat for like a week, and then eventually he did turn Lestat into a vampire, but then he gave Lestat a bunch of money and threw himself into the fire, and then Lestat was alone, which is why he doesn't like being alone, and he has abandonment issues. What I will say is that this is the story of how Lestat is turned per the Vampire Lestat book, which I'm, again, halfway done with. That doesn't necessarily mean that Lestat, AMC Interview with the Vampire Lestat, is telling the truth, though, because, like, the show changes things. People keep vandalizing the house and leaving, like, salt circles and dead birds in front of it because they've been in this small city for so long. I think this is sort of inspired by the book, because in the book, Louis and Lestat have to leave Louis' plantation and flee to New Orleans because the people that Louis has enslaved have figured out that they're vampires. It's, like, I mean, it's uncomfortable for a lot of reasons, but it's also very, like, magical, and they somehow knew through their magical sensing magic abilities and were casting a spell. It's, like, really, the book is bad. Also, like, around this time, back to the show, Lestat is like, "Can I propose a family rule?" And Louis and Claudia are like, "Sure, we'll say stuff." And he's like, "Well, Louis, when you don't eat humans, I feel looked down upon, so I think that we should all eat humans now. You should also have to eat humans as well." And Louis agrees. So yeah, Louis is trying to get Claudia to be, like, nice to Lestat, and she's like, "Well, I'm letting Lestat teach me how to play piano and play chess. Like, what more do you fucking want from me?" So Claudia and Lestat are playing chess, and he keeps getting her in check, but then she keeps on playing instead of, like, giving up. Eventually, she starts saying,
My master taught me how to play, but only enough to occupy his time.
Then he gets pissed and he's like, "I'm gonna hunt alone tonight." And, like, Louis gets really uncomfortable because of this, and probably part of that is because Claudia is absolutely pointing out that there is a power dynamic in both of their relationships with Lestat, because he is white, and that is not something that Lestat wants to acknowledge. Claudia and Louis follow Lestat to where he's gonna go hunt by himself, and you know who he's going to visit? She's still on the board. I'm not gonna trick you guys. Well, I guess technically, actually, I am lying to you guys, because he's turned her into a vampire. So technically, he did kill her, I guess. Louis reasons that Lestat hid Antoinette in, like, just one town away, intending for him and Claudia to find her because he's, like, 50 shades of fucked up or whatever. I don't know. Claudia wants to run away again to find vampires in Europe because she reasons that there must be vampires that aren't, like, Lestat and Bruce. So she finally is like, "I'm leaving. When he hurts you again, like, come find me." And as she leaves, he does call her back by saying, "Hey sis, you're stronger now. You don't need me. You're gonna be okay." And she goes and gets on that train. Apparently, this is when, in 1973, Daniel was like, Give me the gift, you're wasting it! Daniel is then like, well, in the eyes of a 20-year-old, you were wasting the gift. You were, like, living in a shitty room on Divisadero Street. Rashid walks in and Louis is like, hey, Rashid, you're in your 20s. What do you think? And Rashid is like, I mean, he's living in a penthouse in Dubai, so I guess he's not, like, wasting his wealth. And by the way, while all this is happening, fucking Call to Prayer playing. Rashid, what are you doing? So then Louis is like, I would turn you now. Like, I would give you the gift now, Daniel. Like, you know, I would cure your degenerative disease, aka Parkinson's. And Daniel is like, save it for the rent, boy. Just talking about Rashid. And Rashid looks pissed the fuck off and is like, may I be excused? After Claudia leaves, Louis thinks about staying out until the morning and letting the sun frat bro beach bonfire his ass, but he doesn't want to ruin the eve of Claudia's escape and the way that Paul ruined Grace's wedding night. So he gets back home and Lestat is like, listen to the radio. It's World War II. And Louis is like, okay, since when do you care about humans? Like, what? And Lestat is like, well, our sister was gonna go on a holiday in Europe, but, like, glad she thought better of it. And there Claudia is in the chair across from him. Yeah, Lestat did force her to come back by getting on the train and using the head of a ticket collector to as a puppet, and then yelling, tickets please, in like a terrible American accent. So Sam Reed was an Australian doing a French doing an American accent. Did a pretty good job of doing a terrible American accent. Anyways, I think this is Louis a reference to at one point in the book and in the movie. Lestat dances around with somebody's corpse, and I think it's actually Claudia's mom's corpse because she dies of, like, Spanish influenza, maybe? Lestat is like to Claudia, Louis, terribly depressed without you, and now that you're on your own again, what if something terrible were to happen to you? I'm really good at mind reading whatever, and I listen to that one guy Bruce's mind, and, like, you better come home and make Louis happy, because if you try to leave again, I won't, like, assault you, I will just kill you. So then while Claudia and Lestat are playing a game of chess, she mentally tells Louis that she thinks that Lestat killed Magnus, which is her theory in the Interview with the Vampire book. It's just that Anne Rice really retconned a lot of Lestat's character and backstory in the Vampire Lestat. She thinks that Magnus, quote, made him a slave, him being Lestat, in the way that, quote, he has made slaves of her and Louis, and that he killed Magnus because of it before he could, like, learn everything there was to know about being a vampire. This verbiage is actually taken straight from the book, but it takes on a very different meaning when it is a black character saying it to another black character as opposed to, like, a white character saying it to a former slave owner white character. Claudia says she will free them both and that she's going to find a way to kill Lestat as she beats him at chess. God, I love her. I love her so much. And actually what fully happens is that she, like, gets him in check and then refuses to finish the game, and he's like, he throws a tantrum about it. He's like, finish the game, and she's like, I'm tired, I'm gonna go to bed. But before, you know, she does that, she's like, Louis, I'm gonna let you in on a secret. I think you want to kill Lestat too. Louis says, we were going to kill Lestat twice for a fact. Everybody in this show is very dramatic. But Daniel is falling asleep. Levodopa, baby. He calls out to Rashid, asking if he is awake. Rashid responds with, like, there's an intercom click, and he says, I can be. Louis says, I think the medication has made our boy fall asleep. Rashid goes, Julius Reus Infinitum, I would gladly wake him. That's Latin, and it translates to basically, this is a lot of fucking work. Louis says, no, we can pick it up again tomorrow, but will you get him a blanket? I think that he should be warm while he dreams. We zoom in on Daniel Malloy's face. Awesome 1970s music starts to play. We are in a dream memory. Young Daniel Malloy is played by Luke Brandon Field, who, because he's, like, not in a lot of this season, he's not on this board, but he looks creepily like a young Eric Bogosian. Like it's creepy, very very creepy. But yeah, he's smoking a cig. There's a view of the Golden Gate Bridge in the background, and then he walks into Polynesian Mary's, and he puts his like gay little leather bag down on the table, and a voice is like, "What's in the bag?" It's 1970s Louis. Daniel's like, "It's my work," and Louis is like, "Is it a gun? Are you an assassin? Have you come to kill me?" I did a terrible thing once. Louis, how do you not know how to flirt? Louis, why are you so bad at— why would that work on me? Fuck, why would that work on me? The bartender is like, "Do you have any money tonight, Danny?" And he looks kind of around, he's like, "Oh." But Louis, like, you know, throws his credit card down and it's like, give the boy whatever she wants. So, you know, they get to talking, and Daniel tells him that he's a journalist and he mostly does interviews, and that he's got a series with the Berkeley Barb. And he's like, "I could interview you if you want." And I'm not exaggerating about this tone, okay? Roll clip, AMC, do not sue me. This is because we need proof.
Hey, you know, I could interview you.
They don't. This is not the voice of a man just looking to score. Louis is then like, "Okay, but like, I know you came here for drugs," because Louis can read minds. Let's go over back to my room on Divisadero. It's a short walk away. I have drugs. And Daniel's like, "Are you a narc?" And Louis completely seriously is like, "I'm a vampire." And both kind of stare at each other, and then they start laughing, ha 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 ha. And then Daniel goes like, "No, I want to interview you."
I mean, if something happens, you know, I'm cool.
Daniel Malloy, what do you mean it was a good place to score? Daniel Malloy. 1970s Daniel Malloy. 2022 Daniel Malloy. Then Louis turns over his shoulder and is like, "You want to join us?" And then pan to fucking Rashid, who's like, "No, go have your fun." Daniel sits bolt upright, confused as fuck. Why was Rashid there? Why was Rashid in the 1970s? You know, maybe why were you so gay in the 1970s? Jesus Christ. Episode 7. And the thing lay still. It's season finale time, baby. Rashid brings Louis some food, and Daniel is watching him like... For those of you that are just like listening while doing laundry or whatever, which is what I would be doing, I was making really big eye contact, baby. Daniel then asks how immortals can be killed, and Louis lists the classic vampire ways of like beheading, fire, drinking the blood of the dead, whatever. Unfortunately, Lestat is currently pretty paranoid. He's making them all sleep in the same room again. He and Louis are sleeping in the same coffin. There's not a lot of time to plan killing him. He's also making Louis take part in extravagant kills. Again, the episode opens with them slowly draining a guy and putting his blood in a little, I think they're called like decanters. They're interrupted by like a little knock at the door, or maybe a doorbell, I don't know, whatever. They're interrupted by somebody at the door, and it's this guy, and he's like, "I'm a huge fan. People say you guys are the devil, but I think you guys are angels. You should give me eternal life. You guys are awesome." And Lestat does just eat him. But it turns out that the guy whose blood they were like slowly draining was also a door knocker, and it's happening like a lot at this point. So Lestat is like, "We gotta leave. We gotta make plans." Daniel interjects and is like, "Claudia had the plan." And then eyes up Rashid some more. You know, because he saw Rashid in 1970s dream memory, guys, so he's eyeing up Rashid some more. Claudia doesn't want to tell Louis the plan because he and Lestat share a heart. What did I tell you? Gothic romance. She instead wants Louis to give in to him, so he'll be like fully distracted, and she'll pull him out when it's time. Louis suggests a bunch of places in Europe that they could flee to, but Lestat insists that they go to Buenos Aires. He says that it's because of the war. World War II is happening, guys. But like, he's been so insistent that Claudia doesn't go to Europe, and then he's really insistent that they don't go to Europe, and I think everybody's like suspicious about him in Europe at this point. Like, he's been banned or some shit. But also, like, at the same time though, I'm like, yeah, Europe is not a good place to be right then, even for vampires, man. Claudia then suggests throwing a giant party the night before they leave. Like, people want to know the secret about why they're eternally young, so they'd attend, and then they can like eat some people. But Lestat says no. Later, they're watching news clips at the movie theater, and he asks Claudia for more details about her party plan. He also says that the Nazis are beasts but have good tailoring. This is why people don't trust the French, Lestat. This is you are why people don't trust the French. Her plan is to throw a really big party, choose a select few to like share the secret of eternal youth with, and then take them back to the house and then eat them. On New Year's, she proposes that the party be a Mardi Gras ball. Since like Mardi Gras is early that year, it's February 6th, which is correct. That is date accurate with real life. It's not just the vampire timeline, it's our timeline. But it's New Year's. They'd basically have like a month to plan it, and people plan Mardi Gras balls like at least a year in advance. So Lestat is like, there's just no way. There's just no way we can do it. But then she offhandedly is like, well, it would be a party fit for a king. And then he's like, well, like, if we starved ourselves for days beforehand, you know, the hunger would be transcendent. Like, okay, maybe you're cooking, Claudia. So they go to Anderson, God fucking Anderson, who like thinks they've been away for the last 17 years or something. And they're like, we want to do a Mardi Gras ball. And Anderson is like, I'm not a party planner? Like, what? Also, it's January? And y'all are creepy and have not aged. Lestat also wants to be Raj, which is basically like king of Mardi Gras in this context. Technically, he would be the king of the crew of Raj, which I think is based off of the crew of Rex, which is like one of the oldest and most prestigious Mardi Gras crews out there in real life. But anyways, it would be like really hard to bribe your way into being king of really prestigious Mardi Gras crew, even if you like know one person on the board, which Anderson is. Anderson also just like laughs straight up at the idea of Lestat being Raj and says he can't do it. So then they're like, well, we'll bribe you by buying you a new boat, because we know right now your job is shipping coffins, shipping and manufacturing coffins to and from Europe. And one of your boats just got sunk, and you probably want a new coffin boat for your job, which is war profiteering. And he's like, okay, fine guys, I'll make it happen. I'll make the party happen because I love to war profiteer and I'm a racist. Lestat starts pouring truly obscene amounts of money into the costuming and the float and the venue, and there's already like a bunch of gossip about how the public is being granted access to the quote weird brothers and their doll-like sister, and like there's just a lot of buzz about this Mardi Gras ball. Like people will be going, but also I'm sort of like, what kind of brothers do y'all have? Every day I have to live through White Lotus flashbacks. Oh my god. Daniel is once again distracted. He sees Rashid speaking on the phone, on the balcony, in the sun. How was he in your 1970s dream memory if he's in the sun? What is happening with Rashid? Louis is also fully noticing that he's distracted by Rashid. So what they're gonna do is they're gonna mark their targets at the party with these cute little flower pins. Like, look, I want one. Claudia plans to poison the bait, basically, like have Lestat drink poison blood and die. Louis doesn't know this at the time though, because he's like back to being super in love with Lestat. Meanwhile, Lestat is having hella fun being Raj. He pretends to eat a baby. Also, the party is kind of like Rococo themed masquerade. Claudia gets Lestat a pair of twins that are young men whom she's presumably poisoned. Louis feels like something's off, but he is really hungry, so it's hard to focus. He hears a woman vampire's voice say, "Miserable dogs." And then Anderson comes up behind him and is like, "Oh, we're in a whispering gallery like in the US Capitol. You can hear whispering. Don't you love hearing whispering?" And then he calls Louis the F slur. So Louis gets distracted and is like, "Hey, Anderson, wanna live forever." Lestat and Louis share a quiet cigarette on the balcony. Lestat is like, "I'm gonna miss New Orleans. It's desperately live and desperately fragile." And Louis is like, "Okay, let's eat now." And Lestat is like, "Can we have one last dance before the feast?" Louis says that a lot had been written about that bloody night since, but nothing about their very public, very romantic waltz. Quote, as if the only crime unfit to print took place on that dance floor. They get too distracted dancing, they kiss in front of everyone, some people like start to leave, and Claudia cuts in and finishes out the dance with Louis, and she's like, bro, lock in. They gather all the pin people, again, really cute pins, back to their house. Lestat tells everyone that they have the Philosopher's Stone / the Elixir of Life. Anderson assumes that the elixir is in like a punch bowl on the table, so he opens up the punch bowl and it's empty. There's nothing there. So then they start eating everyone. Louis tears a guy's jaw off. It's awesome. Anderson finally gets eaten by Lestat. Get your ass out of here. Mardi Gras music drowns everyone. Dying noises out. Finally, Claudia is like, oh, Louis saved one of these twins that we offered you at the party for you, but unfortunately I ate the other one. And then Lestat closes his eyes and the doorknob jiggles off the front door, and a cunty pair of black shoes, they kind of step through, and you're like, oh, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? Lestat is clearly suspicious that the twin has been poisoned, and Antoinette bursts in and is like, yeah, he has been. She was at the ball dressed in a suit, like disguised as a man, eavesdropping on Louis and Claudia. They all do these like stupid ass hisses. They're like and start to fight. Antoinette forces Claudia towards the twins. Lestat holds Louis back and is like, Antoinette will be a better addition to our life together. Lestat, what are you trying to build, like a fucking harem? What is happening? But then Lestat begins to vomit blood. Antoinette is distracted, so Claudia stabs her with a fire poker, and Claudia is like, how stupid do you think I am? I know that Antoinette's been watching us. She's actually the one that told Lestat that Claudia was leaving the second time, and it turns out that Claudia had poisoned Anderson because she knew that Lestat would eat the guy because he laughed when he said he wanted to be Raj. And look, this is my conspiracy theory. I think that Lestat had been holding that grudge for years, because way at the beginning of when they met at that first card game where he first was like, oh, look, Louis, I can pause time, blah, 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 blah. Anderson, no longer there, thank God, called him Mr. Lestat instead of Mr. Leoncourt, and I think that's what started off the feud. I don't think it was him being horrible to your multiracial black boyfriend. I think it was Mr. Lestat. That's my conspiracy theory though. Lestat calls for Louis, but Louis uses his old pimp cane, the one he threatened his brother with in the first episode, the one he actually also stabbed Lestat with in the first episode, to slit his throat. Lestat is like, I love you. I'm happy that it's you that were the one to kill me, the girl, whatever, theater kid ass, but he bleeds out. Then Claudia dips a pen into his fucking blood and writes his last words, which are, put me in my coffin, Louis, Louis, but in French. Rashid translates this, thank God. I've had to translate Urdu and Latin because of fucking Rashid, actually, but I didn't want to translate French as well. Claudia and Louis burn Antoinette alive. I'm sorry, but this time she is officially dead. But Louis and Claudia can't bring themselves to burn Lestat. Daniel asks what they did with Lestat, and Louise says they rolled him up in a carpet, locked him in a trunk, and put him out with the garbage. Then they drove to the harbor, boarding a merchant vessel, the coffin boat that they had bought Anderson, and they sailed away, quote, ready to begin the adventure of our lives. Daniel is like, okay, but low-key, that's not the sense I get from her diary. And Louis is like, well, you know, it was a traumatic escape. It was a traumatic escape. And Daniel is like, okay, well, maybe it says it in these pages that were like cut out very precisely with a ruler as opposed to torn out like the last time we had this conversation, but it kind of seems like she really hated you for a while. Why is that? And then Daniel like adds on, like, you didn't murder Lestat, you did an act of mercy. And Louis is like, what? I bled him to death. And Daniel is like, where does the trash go, Louis? Lestat was brought to the dump, and Daniel lived real close to Dump and Fishkill with his first wife, so he knows that at the dump there's a lot of real big rats. And Daniel is like, you had to have known that. You were the biggest rat eater of them all. There's a reason Lestat is still on the board, guys. Rashid comes over and is like, this session is over. And Daniel then starts quizzing Rashid about Islam and is like, how did a giant Russian guy pass out after Louis drank from him, but your tiny ass just got up and walked around? Louis is then like, I couldn't burn him. And Daniel is like, Claudia coulda. And Louis is like, no, she couldn't. And Daniel is like, she absolutely is hardcore enough. She recorded his last words in his fucking blood. Louis flees to the reading room as Daniel yells, was it raining, Louis? After him. Louis starts to remember what really happened. He wouldn't let Claudia burn Lestat. To paraphrase Daniel, he chose Lestat over her once again. Rashid is then like, you've only heard half the story, you're going to be so ashamed. And Daniel is like, it's been 144 years and you're still Louis the pimp, paying a whore to sit in a room and talk to you. That's me, I'm the whore. I'm speaking for Daniel. Daniel's like, you just want to tell the world the same story about yourself, Louis. That is, it's not the truth, just the same story about yourself, which is exactly what fucking happened in San Francisco. Behind him, Rashid appears to be like taking something out of his eyes, and he starts getting taller. Levitating, perhaps? Louis is like, not exactly. And Daniel is like, what? And Rashid, now clearly cloud gifting the fuck out of the clouds, is like, this time, I won't save your life. I protect Louis from himself. When he acts outside of his best interests. Saved your life in San Francisco. Which, like, why does he say it like San Francisco? That's almost as bad as saying it San Fran.
San Francisco.
Louis is then like, oh, so you don't remember, huh? You don't remember? I must have forgotten to tell you. Learn to weaponize information for the best. And Daniel is like, I saw you standing in the sun to fucking Rashid. And Rashid is like, I'm 514 years old. I can do whatever I fucking want. While he's flying to go get a book, by the way, which Daniel then starts to leaf through, and it's a bunch of old flyers from the Theatre des Vampires. Sorry, again. Oh god, if I do a season 2 recap, it's gonna be terrible. I cannot speak French. He drifts down, and Louis goes, Daniel Malloy, I'd like you to meet... No! The vampire Armand. The love of my life. And then he grabs his hand. End of season 1, motherfuckers. I love this season. I love this season because I love the show, as you can tell. But I fear I am an Armand apologist at the end of the day, not to give too much away. Which I think is mostly because Assad Zaman just plays, oh my god, he plays like his entire vibe change at the reveal. Like this, I'll show pictures. This are not the same man. This is not the same man. And also then, like, I've seen clips of Assad Zaman just like doing interviews, and that's not the same man either. And you might be like, well, Alexi, that's just how actors work. I'm easily impressed. I'm easily impressed by people that are very talented at their craft, and I think Assad Zaman is very talented at his craft, and his craft is playing the vampire Armand. Thank you so much for watching. You know, not to get too vulnerable on Maine, but this, like, I don't know, this show means a lot to me and it's really important to me, and I get the brain worms about it in a way I don't usually about other media, and I really like making videos. This was kind of a lot of work though for me, so we'll see if I make a season 2 recap. Maybe if my friends text me and are like, hey, please make one, then I will, especially because there's a San Francisco episode and I won't shut up about San Francisco. My intro and outro song are both Take a Vacation by the Young Vanes. All of the like title cards or whatever were made by me in Canva. All channel art is by me. Like, comment, and subscribe. I really love reading and responding to comments because I love to yap and I love to yap to people online. So like, comment please, it'll make my day. Thank you so much again for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye now.